In the peaceful village of Nibini, the sun always rose softly over the green hills, and people lived simple lives. They farmed, sang songs while they worked, and helped one another. In this quiet place lived a kind farmer named Cato. Everyone in the village knew him as a man with a big heart. He helped the old people with their fields and shared his harvest with families who had little food. Cato's laughter was known across the fields. It was warm and full of life. But one rainy season things changed. Cato fell sick. At first it was only a small fever. He told his wife Abony that he would be fine after resting for a day or two. But as the days went by, his fever grew worse. He stopped eating, his hands trembled, and his skin became pale. Abony tried everything she knew. She gave him herbs, warm soup, and prayers. When nothing worked, she called for the village healer, Baba Kunda, to come quickly. Baba Kunda came with his small bag of roots and powders. He sat beside Cato and felt his wrist. His eyes were heavy and he shook his head slowly. He told the family that the fever was strong, stronger than any he had seen that season. He mixed herbs and made Cato drink the bitter mixture. The smell filled the room, and Abony prayed silently as she watched her husband struggle to breathe. By the third night, the whole house was silent. The air felt heavy and the lamp flickered weakly. Cato's chest moved slower and slower until finally it stopped. Abony screamed. Her cry echoed through the night and reached the neighbors. People came running with lanterns and covered their mouths when they saw him. Baba Kunda checked again but said softly, "He is gone." The next morning, the village elders gathered to prepare for the burial. According to their tradition, they could not wait long after a person died. They washed Cato's body gently, wrapped him in white cloth, and placed cowrie shells near his head, a sign of peace for the soul. Children watched from afar, and the women sang low songs that spoke of safe journeys to the spirit world. As the sun began to set, the men carried Cato to the edge of the village, where the ground was soft and the trees whispered in the wind. Abony followed behind, her eyes red with tears. She carried a small basket with his favorite seeds, the ones he used to plant at the start of every season. "So he can keep growing things even in the next life," she whispered. The people buried Cato as the last light of the sun faded. They placed stones over his grave and said their final prayers. Abony knelt down and touched the soil one last time. "Rest, my love," she said quietly. Then the villagers began their slow walk home, leaving only the sound of night insects behind. That night the moon was full. It hung above the village like a silver eye. Most people went to bed early, tired from the long day of mourning. But Abony could not sleep. She sat outside her small hut, staring at the stars. The air was still, but she felt uneasy. Something in her heart refused to rest. Around midnight, a strange sound reached her ears. At first she thought it was the wind moving through the trees. But then it came again, a soft, steady tapping sound. It seemed distant but clear. Tap, tap, tap. She stood up quickly and looked around. The village was silent. No one else seemed to hear it. The sound came again, this time a little louder. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the direction of the burial ground. Abony froze. Her hands shook. "No," she whispered to herself. "It can't be." She tried to convince herself it was an animal digging or the sound of the wind against the stones. But her heart pounded in fear and curiosity. The tapping continued. It was slow, but it didn't stop. Abony ran to her neighbor's hut and knocked on the door. "Mira, wake up. Do you hear that?" she said breathlessly. Mira, still half asleep, listened carefully. The two women stood still in the dark. After a moment, Mira's eyes widened. "It's coming from the graves," she said. They ran to wake two of the village men. Soon, for people were walking through the night, carrying a small lamp that flickered in the wind. The air grew colder as they reached the edge of the village. The tapping grew clearer now. Tap, 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 coming from beneath the ground, from Cato's grave. Abony's knees felt weak. She fell to the ground, tears streaming down her face. "He's calling me," she said. But the others were afraid. Mira held her tightly. "No, Abony. It can't be. The dead do not call back." One of the men, Jomo, took a step closer. "Maybe it's the spirit trying to speak," he said softly. Baba Kunda, who had been called out of his hut, joined them a few minutes later. He stood silently, holding his walking stick, listening to the strange sound. Then he said in a low voice, "We will not touch the grave tonight. If the spirit wishes to speak, we must wait for dawn." The group stayed there for a long time, listening. The tapping slowly faded away until there was only silence. The villagers returned to their homes, whispering among themselves. No one slept well that night. When morning came, the whole village was talking. Some said it was Cato's soul asking for more prayers. Others said the wind had played tricks on their ears. But Abony knew what she had heard. She went to Mama Zuri, the old woman known for her wisdom. Mama Zuri listened quietly as Abony told her everything. When she finished, the old woman nodded slowly. "The earth never speaks without reason," Mama Zuri said. "If you heard that sound, it means the story is not over." Abony looked confused. "What do you mean?" she asked. Mama Zuri took her hand gently. "Sometimes, when the living bury a man before his time, the spirit fights to return." Abony's eyes widened in shock. "Before his time?" she whispered. "But, the healer said he was gone." Mama Zuri only sighed. "Even healers can make mistakes. Go to the grave tonight. Listen again. If the earth speaks a second time, we will know what must be done." As the sun went down again, Abony waited by her window, her heart beating fast. The village was quiet. The same silver moon rose above the trees. And then, just as the night before, the sound began, faint but real. Tap, tap, tap. This time she did not run away. She stood still, tears in her eyes, and whispered into the night, "Cato, if you can hear me, I will find you." The sound grew louder, like an answer from the earth itself. And though the night was dark and full of fear, something inside Abony changed. She no longer felt only sadness. She felt hope, strange, trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, the man she loved was not truly gone. After Cato's burial, days passed slowly in the quiet village of Ndabini. The air around his home felt heavy, as if even the wind refused to blow. His wife, Abony, sat by the doorway each evening, staring at the fields that Cato once worked with joy. The crops were beginning to dry, and the laughter that used to fill their home had vanished. Cato's younger brother, Lemba, had been close to him since childhood. They had grown up working side by side, planting, harvesting, and sharing stories around the fire. When Cato died, Lemba felt as though a piece of himself had been buried too. For days he could not eat or speak much. He stayed quiet, doing his work with empty eyes. But then strange dreams began to come to him. The first dream came 3 nights after the burial. Lemba saw himself standing by a wide river. The water was calm and a mist hung over it. From the other side he saw a figure walking toward him. At first he thought it was just his mind playing tricks. But as the figure came closer, he saw Cato, wearing the same white cloth he had been buried in. "Cato?" Lemba whispered in the dream. Cato smiled gently, his eyes filled with something deep, not sadness but a quiet knowing. He said, "I am not gone, Lemba. I am between worlds. Listen to me." His voice sounded like the wind, soft but clear. Before Lemba could ask anything, the river began to glow, and Cato slowly faded into the mist. Lemba woke up with a gasp, his heart beating fast. The sound of crickets filled the night, and his clothes were damp with sweat. He sat up and looked around, trying to calm himself. The dream had felt too real. The way Cato spoke, the way the water shimmered, it was as if he had truly been there. The next morning, Lemba went to Abony's hut. She was sitting quietly, grinding maize for breakfast. Her face looked tired, her eyes hollow from crying. "Abony," Lemba said softly, "I saw him." Abony looked up in confusion. "Saw who?" "Cato," Lemba replied. "In my dream. He stood by a river. He spoke to me. He said he was not gone." Abony dropped the pestle from her hand, her face pale. "Don't say such things, Lemba," she whispered. "The dead should rest. Don't call him back." "But I didn't call him," Lemba insisted. "He came to me." Abony shook her head and turned away. "It was your grief, that's all. Dreams come when our hearts are heavy." Lemba wanted to believe her, but deep down he knew the dream had been different. It wasn't like the ones he used to have. This one had weight, as if it carried a message. That night he dreamt again. He was back by the same river, but this time the sky was darker and the mist was thicker. Cato stood closer now. His voice was urgent. "Lemba, they buried me too soon. I'm still here. The earth is cold, but I breathe. Help me." Lemba tried to run to him, but the river widened between them. He shouted, "How can I help you, Cato?" But before Cato could answer, the water began to rise and Lemba woke up, his heart pounding. He sat outside under the stars, trying to make sense of it. The night was quiet except for the sound of frogs by the pond. He whispered to himself, "If this is truly you, brother, show me a sign." The next morning, when Lemba went to fetch water from the well, he noticed something strange. A line of small footprints led from the path toward the burial ground. The footprints were faint, as if made by someone walking barefoot after rain. They stopped near Cato's grave. Lemba stared for a long time, his mouth dry. The soil around the grave looked disturbed, as though something beneath had moved. He ran to the village square where the elders were sitting under the big mango tree. "Elders," he shouted. "I saw something at Cato's grave." The elders looked at him with surprise. One of them, old Sephew, frowned. "What kind of thing?" "Footprints," Lemba said quickly. "They lead to his grave. And the soil has moved, I think." Before he could finish, the other elder, Jabari, waved his hand. "Enough. You are seeing things. Grief is making you lose your mind." Lemba clenched his fists. "No, I swear it. And I've seen him in my dreams." He said he is not gone. The men laughed softly, shaking their heads. "The dead don't walk, Lemba," one said. "Let your brother rest." But one person did not laugh. Mama Zuri, the oldest woman in the village. She had been sitting quietly in the shade, listening. Her eyes were sharp even in her old age. She stood up slowly and looked at Lemba. "Tell me, child," she said. "Did he speak your name?" Lemba nodded. "Yes, Mama Zuri." He said, "I am not gone, Lemba." The old woman's face grew serious. "Then listen carefully," she said in a deep voice. "The earth never lies. When the buried call your name, it means their journey is not complete." The elders fell silent. Even the wind seemed to stop for a moment. "Are you saying his spirit is trapped?" one of them asked. Mama Zuri nodded. "Perhaps not the spirit," she said slowly. "Perhaps the body still holds breath." Lemba's eyes widened. "You believe me, Mama?" "I believe what the earth tells me," she said. "Go back to his grave tonight. Watch and listen. If the ground moves again, we will know the truth." That night, Lemba waited by his window, watching the moon rise over the hills. The village had fallen asleep, and the night was quiet except for the distant hoot of an owl. His hands trembled as he held the small oil lamp. He wanted to be brave, but fear pressed heavily on his chest. Finally, when the moon reached the top of the sky, he walked quietly toward the burial ground. The grass was wet and the air smelled of damp earth. When he reached Cato's grave, he knelt down, his heart pounding. The soil looked the same as before, but as he leaned closer, he heard it. Tap, tap, tap. He froze. The sound was faint but clear, like someone knocking slowly from beneath. His hands shook as he whispered, "Cato, is that you?" The tapping stopped for a moment, then came again, this time softer. Tap, tap, tap. Lemba's eyes filled with tears. "I hear you, brother," he whispered. "I will not leave you." He turned and ran back toward Mama Zuri's hut. She was already awake, as if she had been waiting. When she saw his face, she nodded. "It spoke again, didn't it?" Lemba nodded quickly. "Yes, the sound was there. He is alive. I can feel it." Mama Zuri took a deep breath. "Then tomorrow we will call the elders again. They will see for themselves." The next day, as the sun rose, the whole village gathered at the burial ground. Lemba stood beside Mama Zuri, pointing to the grave. The elders watched in silence. Then, as if answering their doubts, the sound began once more. Tap, tap, tap. Gasps filled the air. The people stepped back in fear. Mama Zuri raised her hand and said, "You see now. The earth never lies." Lemba fell to his knees, crying with relief. Somewhere beneath that mound of soil, his brother was alive, waiting for the world to listen. The sky was still dark when Lemba woke up. The air was cold and the sound of crickets filled the quiet morning. He had barely slept that night, turning over again and again, thinking about the strange sound that came from his brother's grave. His heart told him that Cato was alive. Every word that Mama Zuri had said echoed in his mind. The earth never lies. Before the first light of dawn touched the hills, Lemba went to Mama Zuri's hut. The old woman was already awake, sitting near a small fire, grinding herbs between her palms. Her eyes lifted slowly when Lemba entered. She didn't need to ask what he wanted. She could see the fear and hope on his face. "It is time," she said softly. Lemba nodded. "Yes, Mama. I can't wait any longer. If Cato is alive, we must help him now." Mama Zuri wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stood up. "Then we go before the sun rises," she said. "Bring a lamp and call no one else. The fewer eyes, the stronger the truth." The two walked quietly through the sleeping village. The ground was damp with morning dew, and mist floated above the fields. Birds had not yet begun to sing. Every step Lemba took felt heavy with fear. He prayed silently, asking the ancestors for courage. When they reached the burial ground, the world was still. The grave lay before them, a small mound of dark soil surrounded by stones. The trees nearby swayed gently as if watching. Lemba placed the lamp on the ground and knelt beside the grave. Mama Zuri began to hum softly, a low rhythmic sound that rose and fell like the wind. It was an old song of calling, a song to wake the spirits of truth. Lemba bowed his head, whispering his brother's name again and again. Cato. Cato, if you can hear me, give us a sign. At first there was nothing but silence. The night air pressed against their ears. Then faintly from beneath the ground came a sound, weak, broken, but real. It was not the tapping they had heard before. This time it was a cry. A faint, trembling cry. Lemba's eyes widened. He dropped the lamp in shock and the flame flickered wildly. Mama. Did you hear that? He shouted. Mama Zuri raised her hand for silence and leaned close to the soil. The cry came again, muffled but unmistakable. It was the sound of a man struggling to breathe. Her voice shook slightly as she whispered, "He is alive." Without another word, Lemba began digging with his bare hands. The soil was wet and heavy, clinging to his fingers, but he didn't stop. His nails tore, his palms burned, but he kept digging. "Hold on, Cato. I'm coming," he cried. Mama Zuri dropped to her knees beside him, using a small wooden bowl to scoop away the dirt. The smell of the earth was strong, and sweat ran down their faces despite the cold morning. Every few seconds Lemba stopped to listen. The cry grew a little stronger, a little clearer. "Cato, keep breathing. Please, brother." As they dug deeper, the white cloth began to appear. Lemba's heart pounded in his chest. He tore away the last layer of soil and shouted, "I see him! I see him!" The body lay still for a moment. Cato's face was pale and covered in dirt, but his chest moved, faintly, softly. His lips parted and a weak breath escaped. His eyes fluttered open for just a second and Lemba froze. "He's breathing," Lemba whispered, his voice breaking. "Mama, he's alive." Tears rolled down his cheeks as he lifted his brother's head. Cato's eyes barely opened, his lips dry and cracked. His voice came out like a whisper carried by wind. "Lemba, you came." "Yes, brother, I came," Lemba said, holding his hand tightly. "You're safe now." Mama Zuri quickly took out a small gourd filled with water and poured a little into Cato's mouth. He coughed weakly, the sound rough but alive. Then she began rubbing his chest with herbal oil, murmuring old words that called for life and warmth to return. Slowly, color began to return to Cato's face. His breathing grew stronger, though still shallow. Lemba held him close, rocking back and forth, thanking the ancestors for mercy. When the first light of dawn spread across the sky, the world seemed to breathe again. Birds began to sing and the mist lifted from the fields. Lemba looked up at the sunrise and whispered, "He's alive. The sun has seen it." They wrapped Cato in a blanket and carried him back toward the village. The path felt longer than ever, but Lemba's steps were light. Mama Zuri walked behind them, whispering prayers of protection. When they reached Abani's hut, she was just stepping outside. Her eyes widened in shock as she saw them. The blanket moved slightly, and when she saw Cato's face, she dropped to her knees. "No, this can't be." "It's him," Lemba said, his voice trembling. "He's alive. The ancestors have returned him to us." Abani covered her mouth with her hands, tears pouring down her face. She reached out and touched Cato's cheek gently, afraid that he would disappear like a dream. But his skin was warm. He opened his eyes slowly and managed a weak smile. "Abani," he whispered. "I told you. I would not leave you." She cried harder, pressing her forehead against his. "You came back to me, Cato. You came back." Lemba and Mama Zuri helped carry him inside. They laid him on a mat and covered him with warm cloths. Mama Zuri crushed more herbs and boiled them in a pot, filling the room with a strong, healing smell. As Cato rested, he spoke in short whispers. "I heard you calling me," he said to Lemba. "It was so dark where I was. I could not move. I thought it was the end." Lemba held his hand. "You fought, brother. You stayed alive." Cato nodded weakly. "I saw light. I heard the ancestors. They said my time had not come. They showed me the path home." Mama Zuri listened quietly and nodded. "The ancestors spoke truth through the earth. You were not meant to go yet." Word spread quickly through the village. People came running to see what had happened. When they saw Cato alive, they fell to their knees, whispering prayers. Some cried in joy, others bowed to Mama Zuri, calling her wise and blessed. Baba Kunda, the healer who had declared Cato dead, came last. His face was pale with shame. He looked at Cato and said softly, "I was wrong. I did not see the life still inside you." Mama Zuri touched his shoulder. "You are a man, not a god," she said kindly. "Even the wise can make mistakes. But let this be a lesson, never bury the living too soon." As the sun rose higher, Cato drifted in and out of sleep. He was weak, but every breath he took was a gift. Ebony sat beside him, never letting go of his hand. Lemba stayed by the door, watching over them with quiet pride. Later that day, when the village calmed, Mama Zuri spoke softly to Lemba. "Remember this morning, child," she said. "The world has seen a miracle. But it also gave a warning. Life and death are closer than people think. You must listen when the earth speaks." Lemba nodded. He looked at his brother sleeping peacefully and whispered, "I will never forget." That night, when the stars came out, the village was silent except for the sound of frogs and crickets. Ebony sat beside Cato's mat, brushing his hair gently. Lemba looked out at the dark fields and smiled. For the first time in days, the air felt light again. The earth had given back what it had taken, and in that quiet village of Ndabini, everyone learned that faith, love and courage could awaken even the buried. The days after Cato's return were filled with wonder and quiet awe. The people of Ndabini spoke of nothing else. Some whispered that the ancestors had sent him back. Others said he had crossed between life and death and returned with wisdom. But for Cato himself, everything felt strange. The sunlight looked brighter, the air smelled richer, and even the sound of birds seemed new to his ears. He spent his days resting in his small hut, with Ebony always by his side. Lemba visited often, bringing fruits and herbs to help him heal. Mama Zuri came too, checking on him and burning incense to keep his spirit calm. Though Cato's body grew stronger each day, his mind was heavy with memories that did not belong to the world of the living. One evening, as the sky turned orange and gold, Cato asked Mama Zuri and Lemba to sit with him. He said quietly, "There is something I must tell you. Something I saw while I was beneath the earth." They both leaned closer. The sound of the crickets outside filled the silence. "When I lay in the darkness," Cato began, "I could not move. The earth was heavy on me and the air was gone. I thought I was dying again. But then I saw a light, small at first like the flame of a lamp. It grew brighter and I heard voices calling my name. I opened my eyes and I was no longer under the ground." Lemba frowned slightly. "Where were you, brother?" Cato looked into the distance. "I was standing in a place I had never seen before. There was a wide plain covered with white sand, and a river that shone like glass. I saw people on the other side, hundreds of them all dressed in white cloth. They were singing, their voices soft and kind. I felt peace but also fear. I wanted to cross the river, but someone called my name." "Who called you?" Ebony asked softly. Cato's eyes grew distant. It was Grandfather Sephiu. I knew him even though he had been gone many years. He stood beside a tall tree and said, "Cato, your time has not come. Go back." I wanted to ask him why, but he raised his hand and pointed behind me. When I turned, I saw two more elders, ancestors I had never met. They showed me something glowing in the forest far away. It was a plant with long green leaves and small white flowers. One of them said, "This plant is the key. Remember it, for it will heal those who suffer." Then everything went dark again. Mama Zuri sat quietly nodding. "The ancestors never speak without reason," she said. "Did they show you where to find it?" Cato nodded slowly. "I saw the path. It was the same forest beyond the river bend, the one people fear to enter because of spirits. But I must go. I feel the call inside me." Lemba looked worried. "Brother, you just came back from death. Should you really go into that forest now?" Cato smiled faintly. "If the ancestors send a message, we must listen. I was not returned for nothing." Mama Zuri placed her hand on his shoulder. "Then I will go with you. The forest listens to me. If the plant is truly there, we will find it." The next morning, before the sun rose, Cato, Lemba, and Mama Zuri set out toward the forest. The path was quiet, and mist hung low over the grass. Birds called softly as they walked. Cato felt stronger than he had since his illness. Every step felt guided by unseen hands. When they reached the edge of the forest, a cool breeze blew through the trees. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and wild flowers. Lemba hesitated, looking at the shadows between the trees. "It feels strange here," he said. "Like the air is watching us." Mama Zuri smiled gently. "That is how the spirits welcome us. Do not fear." They walked deeper into the forest, following a narrow trail that wound between tall trees. Shafts of sunlight broke through the leaves, painting the ground in gold. For a while, there was no sign of anything unusual. But then Cato stopped suddenly. "Here," he said quietly. Before them stood a small clearing, where a stream flowed gently over smooth stones. On the far side of the stream grew a cluster of plants with long green leaves and white flowers that shimmered in the light. exactly as Cato had seen in his vision. Mama Zuri's eyes widened. "You have truly seen the way," she whispered. "These are not ordinary plants. They are the healing kind, known only to those who listen to the ancestors." Cato knelt by the stream and touched one of the leaves. It felt cool and alive under his fingers. "This is it," he said softly. "The gift they showed me." They gathered a few leaves carefully and carried them back to the village. Mama Zuri mixed the leaves into a paste with other herbs and water. The scent filled the air, fresh and sweet. She tested it first on a child who had been sick with the same fever that had almost killed Cato. Within a day the fever began to fade. By the third day the child was running and laughing again. News spread quickly. People from nearby villages came to see the miracle plant that Cato had found. They brought their sick, their weak, and their old. Mama Zuri and Cato worked together, using the paste to heal them. Soon, the sickness that had spread across the land began to disappear. The villagers called Cato, the man of two worlds. They said he had walked in the land of the ancestors and brought back their gift. Cato never argued. He simply said, "It was not my power. It was theirs." One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Cato sat outside his hut with Abani and Lemba. The air was warm and golden. Children played nearby and the village was full of laughter again. Lemba smiled at his brother. "Do you ever think about what happened down there, beneath the earth?" Cato nodded. "Every day. When I close my eyes I still see the river. I still hear grandfather's voice. It reminds me that life is fragile. We walk close to death without knowing it." Abani touched his hand. "But you came back," she said softly. "And because of that, so many others now live." Cato smiled gently. "It was never about me. It was a message. The ancestors wanted us to see that healing can come from faith, and that fear keeps us blind to what is near." Mama Zuri joined them, carrying her staff. "And you listened," she said proudly. "That is what makes the difference. Many hear but few listen." The three sat together, watching the stars appear one by one in the sky. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of the healing plants that now grew in every garden in Ndebini. Later that night, when the village slept, Cato walked alone to the edge of the forest. The moonlight fell across the path he had taken before. He knelt by the stream and placed his hand on the ground. "Thank you," he whispered to the unseen ancestors. "For life, for hope, for this gift." A soft breeze moved through the leaves as if answering him. Cato smiled and looked up at the stars. In that moment he felt both small and infinite, a man who had touched death but learned the meaning of life. He stood quietly for a while, listening to the forest. It was peaceful now, alive with quiet voices only his heart could hear. He knew that the ancestors still watched, guiding him, guiding them all. And when he finally turned to walk back toward the village, the path glowed faintly under the moonlight, the same light that had once led him back from the edge of death to the world of the living. After many months, life in Ndebini returned to peace. The sickness that once filled the village was gone. The people laughed again, their fields grew green, and their children played freely in the dusty paths. But even with the return of happiness, one name was always spoken with wonder and respect: Cato. He had become more than a farmer. To the people, he was a man touched by the ancestors, the one who had crossed the boundary between life and death and come back with a gift. Yet to Cato himself he was still the same man, simple, quiet, and grateful for every breath. He often said, "I was dead, but the ancestors gave me a second chance. I must use it well." Every morning he woke before sunrise and sat outside his small hut to watch the sky turn from dark blue to gold. Abani would bring him a cup of warm tea and sit beside him. Sometimes they spoke softly, other times they sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the waking village. Cato had learned that silence too could speak. One day he walked to the edge of the forest, the same forest where he had found the healing plant. There he began to build a small shrine from stones and wood. He worked with patience, laying each piece carefully. When Lemba came and asked, "Brother, why do you build this place?" Cato smiled and said, "It is a home for thanks. The ancestors saved me and I must honor them." Over time, the shrine became a peaceful spot surrounded by flowers and soft grass. Villagers often came there to pray or sit in quiet thought. Cato planted the same healing plants around the shrine, their white flowers glowing softly in the sunlight. Whenever he looked at them, he felt the presence of the river from his vision, and the calm voices of those who had guided him back. As days turned to weeks, Cato began teaching the young ones about the power of faith and kindness. He told them stories of the past, of bravery, hope, and the bond between the living and the dead. The children listened closely, their eyes wide with wonder. "Do not fear death," he would say gently. It is not an end, only a doorway. But faith, love, and courage, those are the keys that keep the door open. The people began to call him the man who walked between worlds. When travelers passed through Ndibini, they came to see him, to hear his words, and to learn from his calm wisdom. Some came with pain, others with questions. Cato listened to each one with care. He did not speak loudly or try to show power. He spoke softly, but his words carried truth. One day, a woman came from a far village. Her husband had fallen sick with a strange fever that no one could cure. She knelt before Cato and begged for help. Cato looked at her with kindness and said, "Do not bow to me, sister. Stand. The power to heal is not mine, it is in the faith that moves through us." He gave her a handful of the healing leaves and showed her how to prepare them. "When you give this to your husband," he said, "speak to the ancestors with a clean heart. Ask not only for healing but for peace." Weeks later she returned with tears of joy. Her husband was healed. She brought gifts of fruit and cloth, but Cato refused them. "I need nothing," he said. "If your heart is at peace, then my work is done." Even Mama Zuri, wise as she was, often came to Cato's shrine to seek guidance. She told him, "The ancestors chose well. You walk humbly, though your story is great." Cato smiled gently. "I'm only a bridge, Mama Zuri. The wisdom belongs to them." At night, the villagers would gather by the fire to hear him speak. He told them that life and death were not enemies but parts of the same circle. "When we fear death," he said one evening, "we forget to live fully. But when we remember that life is a gift from those who came before us, we live with purpose." The firelight danced across their faces as they listened. Some felt comfort, others felt courage. The words stayed with them long after the night grew silent. Cato often walked alone through the fields, his feet touching the same soil that had once covered him. Every step reminded him how close death had been, and how precious life truly was. Sometimes he stopped and closed his eyes, hearing again the whisper of the ancestors, "Your time has not come." He had built his shrine not as a temple for worship, but as a place for remembering. Anyone could come, rich or poor, young or old. There were no offerings, no rules, only a quiet space for thought. Children liked to leave small stones there, saying it helped their wishes reach the sky. Years passed, but Cato never grew proud. He stayed humble and kind, helping anyone who came to him. When storms destroyed fields, he helped rebuild them. When quarrels broke out, he listened and brought peace. The people said his presence calmed the air. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Cato sat by his shrine with Abani and Lemba. The sky was red and gold, and the sound of crickets filled the air. Lemba looked at his brother and said, "You have done so much for this village, Cato. You gave us hope when we had none." Cato smiled softly. "It was not me, Lemba. It was faith. Faith carried me from death to life. Faith carried us all through the darkness." Abani touched his arm gently. "But you listen when others would not. That is what makes you special." Cato looked toward the trees, where the shadows stretched long. "The ancestors speak to everyone," he said quietly. "But most hearts are too loud to hear. I only learned to listen." As night fell, a cool wind moved through the shrine, making the leaves of the healing plants tremble softly. Cato felt their energy and whispered, "Life and death are closer than we think, but faith keeps the door open." The next morning, the village awoke to find a peaceful silence around Cato's hut. He was sitting outside, his eyes closed, a calm smile on his face. It was as if he had simply drifted into sleep. The people wept, but there was no sorrow in their hearts, only peace. They buried him beside the shrine he had built, surrounded by the healing plants that still glowed faintly under the sun. Years later, travelers who passed through Ndibini would stop by the shrine and hear the story of Cato, the man who had been buried alive and returned with the wisdom of the ancestors. The villagers always ended the tale with his final words, carved into a wooden plaque above the shrine. "Life and death are closer than we think, but faith keeps the door open." And so, his story lived on, a story of hope, courage, and the power of belief. The plants he had found continued to heal, and the shrine remained a place of peace for all who sought comfort. Every breeze that passed through the forest seemed to carry his spirit, gentle, kind, and everlasting, reminding everyone that the line between life and death was not something to fear, but something to understand. In the quiet of Ndibini, under the stars and the rustling trees, Cato's name was still spoken, not as a tale of death but as a lesson of life.